So now it's time for us to create our repository. So we've done working with the lower end here. So room database, DAO, entity. It's time for us to look at a repository. Remember, repository, as the name implies, is just a repository of something, in this case data. But most importantly here, this class, it's not part of a room Android room architecture, but it is a class that we use because it helps us to abstract out this connection between the lower level things here, room, database, entity, SQLite, DAO, with the user interface at the top. Okay, but most importantly, also the repository allows us to do all sort of things, because the idea here is to make it so that it doesn't matter where we get the data, the user interface will still be able to display that data. Right, so we're dispersing concerns here, right? So in this case here, we know we're getting from DAO, from our room database, and so forth. But it could be also through our repository. We want to make it so that we can get data from, say, a remote API somewhere else, get data from a text file somewhere else. The top part of our application here, the user interface, won't care. All it cares about is going to be to receive a data. It doesn't really care where it comes from. So that is one of the many things why we want to use a repository, okay? Because we can use multiple backends to get data from. Let's go ahead and create our repository class. I'm going to put our repository inside of our util because it's more of a util class. We say Java class. I'm going to call this no-do repository. I did it right, like that. Very good. In this case, and of course, I'm going to create a private instance variable that will have access to our DAO class. Let's say DAO, which in this case is our no-do DAO. No-do DAO like this. Then I'm going to, of course, have access in this case to our live data, remember, which is going to be a list which will contain no-do objects. Okay, I'm going to call this all no-dos. Let's create a constructor here. Now in this case here, I'm not going to pass anything to our constructor because we're going to pass a context. But the context we're going to pass is not going to be related to activity or anything else. It's actually going to be the most global context you can ever pass, which is the application class. So I'm going to say application like that. The reason why we're doing this is because we want to make sure that the life of our repository or whatever we're doing inside of a room, Android room, it's beyond just an activity cycle or even a view. It's beyond everything, right? The context is going to be the actual application, meaning everything in our application. That's why we're passing application type. All right, so then here we're going to go ahead and create an instance of our room database. I'm going to say room database. So I guess it's going to be our no-do room database. I'm going to call this DB, like this for short. I'm going to equal to no-do room database .get database, like that. I'm going to pass our application. So it seems like we haven't created our get database yet. Let's see. Let's go to our no room. Right. I made a mistake. It's get database. Let's see. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Yet it's giving me a little issue here. Let's see. It looks like get database can be accessed from outside because it's not public. Let's go make it public, I think. In fact, let's go back down here to the source. I'm going to make this public because we want to make it accessible everywhere. Let's make that public. There we go. So now it's public static. Okay, that works. So next here, once we create, we have now our database handle here, which means we can come down here and do all sort of things, right? We can say db.noDAO, we can say .delete and no-do, get all, insert, and do all sort of things. So that's very cool. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to instantiate, of course, a no-do-DAO. So an object for our no-do list. So I'm going to say no-do is equal to db dot no-do-DAO. Okay. So in this case here, what we're doing, we're just getting a handle of just one instance of a no-do-DAO. Very good. So once we have that, we can do all sort of things. All no-dos is equal to what? It's going to be equal to no-do-DAO. Because I have that handle, I can just go ahead and say get all no-dos. So our repository now is going to have all do's, which we can then use all those do's. So it's a no-do repository, get all do's, which will know how to go and get all this stuff and give us all the information we want. Okay, now the beauty again here is because we could have been okay without having a repository, as I said before, but notice how beautiful this is. Inside of our no-do repository constructor here, we are instantiating or getting one instance of our database, right? And then get a no-do item and then be able to get all of items from our database, right? So we have that data, but we could have also instantiated something like get data from an API, I should say a remote API, and then put it on a different list as well. So we could have created another list, live data, and do the same thing. So that would be great because now we can only invoke our no-do repository, to get all that information in one go. Okay, so this structure here of building our application is very, very intuitive. It may seem as though there's a lot of work that upfront that we're doing, but in the end, it's way better because we will know exactly where things are. It's easier to test our application, parts of our application, and all around is just a good deal. All right, so let's continue here. The next thing we're going to do, because remember, we are inside of a repository, there are things we can do with it, right? So we instantiated here with our constructor. So we can go ahead and actually create a get all no-dos from here as well. I'm going to say live data. Remember this, I'm going to make a list. It's going to be of no-do. And I'm going to say get all no-dos in this case here. Let's put like that. This will return what? Well, it's going to return all no-dos. Let's say all no-dos. Because at this point here, all no-dos will have had all of the items inside of our database. Right? Because this is what we creating up here, and then we instantiate in our constructor, and then we call get all no-dos from a repository. Then we get everything. It looks like repetition because we've seen this method before, but this is actually better. We know we're always getting data from a repository. All right. So again, I can come down here and do certain things like adding things to our database, right? Because I can say void, because remember, like I said, our repository here is able to connect with everything inside here, inside of our room database, DAO, entity, SQLite, and everything. That is the beauty of having a repository. So I can come down here. As I was saying, void, I say insert, and what is it I'm going to insert? A no-do item, like this. Now in this case here, to insert, we've seen before how to insert things when we interface, right? We have this insert at the top here. We just say no-do, and then we call it, and we can just pass the object, and life is good. However, at this point here, because we're inside of a repository, it's a class that notice that we don't have any annotations here. That's why I said it's a class that it's not part of our room, our Android room. Nevertheless, it's important. So that means here we have to use a async task. So what is an async task? Async task is a class, an Android class that allows us to make all these transactions asynchronously, because we want to make sure that as things happen, right, as all these transactions are happening, inserting, getting things, and all so forth, we don't want it to clog the main thread, which is where everything is happening, especially the user interface, right? So in this case here, for us to insert, we need to insert through an async task class. And what are we going to do here? In fact, I'm going to just go ahead and say new insert, async task, and we are going to be passing the DAO class because it knows how to do everything. So do DAO, remember class, and then I'm going to call the execute, which we haven't created, and we're going to pass what is it that we're going to be adding to our database. In this case, it's going to be the object no-do that we are passing there. All right, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's go ahead and actually create this async inner class. So we have our class async, insert async. Now this class here, I'm going to say it will extend the Android class async task. So hit enter, and for our async task here, we have to pass a few parameters. So what are the things that we're going to be passing around in our thread so that then they can sequentially or asequentially, if that's even a word, being added to the different threads and then added to a database. In this case here, I'm going to say the thing that we want to pass through in our async task here is going to be the object no do, because that is the center of everything. And the rest I'm going to say void and void. Very good. So notice we have a big little problem here. We know how to solve. Just go ahead and implement a method. Look at that. It says do in background. That is the beauty. Because I said this whole thing that we are doing here, it has to be through proper channels. That's the reason why we are using async task. Right? We can just go directly and start putting things in the main thread and hope for the best, because that is not a good strategy. And Android won't let you do that. Right? So we have to go through the proper channels. And the beauty here, again, our async task, because we're extending it, right, we'll have to override the do it in the background. So everything we put inside here is going to be done, as the name implies, in the background. So what we're going to pass here, instead of just an object, I'm going to just pass the DAO object, right, the no do DAO, because it is indeed our data access object. I'm going to call this DAO. That's fine. Well, this is just our constructor of our inner class here. Very good. So inside here, we want to construct something, make something ready for things to work. Well, what is it we're going to be doing? Well, I'm going to say, I'm going to add an instance variable here. I'm going to say private DAO, like this, no DAO. I'm going to call this async task DAO. Okay, so that we can actually instantiate here. So async DAO is going to be equal to the DAO that we're going to be passing. So just initializing things there. Now, the work is inside of do in background. Okay. Notice we are passing this no do and ... no do's. This just means we can pass as many parameters as we want. Okay. They will all be no do types. In this case, I can just change this to params. So as in parameters. So now what are we going to be doing here? Well, we're going to use the async task DAO, which has connection to DAO, which if you click here has the insert and all that stuff, right? So we're going to use that here to insert stuff into our database. So I'm going to say async task DAO, invoke the insert method, which you've seen before. In fact, go ahead and click on no DAO again. Now we are using the insert method from our no DAO. Oh, very cool. All right. And I'm going to insert. So what is it that I'm going to be inserting here? Well, I need to know what object or whatever is it that we're getting from our async task. So it isn't going to be an object, right? Now, because I know this could be a lot of objects that we've been passing here, because we don't know for sure. That's why we have ... but we know it's going to be a no do type. Now the parameters here is going to be of this type that we have inside here. Now when they come, these parameters, they're going to come indeed as an array like this. Like this. Let's say object 1, object 2, and so forth. So what I'm going to do now, we know it's going to be on the first part or on the first index of this array of parameters object. That's why I can go ahead here and say params and pass 0 to say the first thing we're going to get, which is going to be an object of no do type. That's what we're going to be using to insert into our DAO. Ooh. All right. That's it. So now this will guarantee that every time we call insert async task, or rather, I should say, we call the insert method in this case here from our repository is going to go and call insert async task and pass no do DAO object, but that's what's needed, and then it will do all the work in the background, which is exactly what we want. Now, the reason why we're having issues here, we're just passing the class name. We actually have to pass this instance variable here, the no do DAO, because it's a type no do DAO, right? So I'm going to change that to no do DAO like that, and we should be good. All right, so there we go. So now we have created our repository, which is this here. Okay, so this makes sense again, right? Because repository goes directly, it has to have an instance of DAO, which what we did. And inside of it, as you saw, we had to create the async task, because we want to make sure that everything is that in the background. And the beauty, again, this is very important to remember, is that now with our repository in our constructor here, we can actually get data from all sort of places, and it would not affect the whole application. Because remember, we are separating everything in such a way that the user interface, which we're going to be talking about later, doesn't care exactly where does data come from. As developers, we care, or we know what's going on, but if we were to pass this repository to somebody else, they can care less where it comes from, because you can get data from all sort of places and put it all together into a live data, which is going to be in our view model and then displayed in our user interface. Okay, I understand this is a little bit advanced, but at this point, I think you can do this. I think you can wrap your head around here. Maybe a little bit difficult. I get it. That's the beauty of developing, okay? We're going to get frustrated sometimes, but remember that at the end of the day, if you really keep at it, rewatch these videos, ask questions, try to figure out, you're going to keep becoming a better developer. That's what it takes, folks. All right, I'll see you next.